So I am going to tell you guys stuff you already know. So this will be fast. This is campsites on the air, or as I say in my subtitle, any day can be a field day. And in fact, the Tuesday through just this afternoon, I was at Pacific Beach for the last couple of days, camping out and using my radio with the antenna out there and making contacts on 10 meters and 20 and 40 meters and 17 meters. So I was having a good time out there. Yes, it was raining. So I didn't get to, I was going out there to test a number of different antennas that I had just been playing with during the last couple of months. And unfortunately, I really didn't want to feel like playing with those antennas and adjusting them in the rain. So I went with a quicker setup. But yeah, my thing is campsites on the air. I operate casually out of the car, whether I'm just going off for half a day or an hour or two, or if I'm going camping. And I take road trips periodically, anywhere from a few days like I just did to three or 4 weeks. And so I'm out there living out of my minivan and playing radio and taking up space with my camera as well. So, you know, I'm going to, just to get things sort of set at the level playing field, I want to define what I'm going to call a coda. I'm trying to coin a phrase. Coda, there's soda, there's PODA. I want coda. Okay, so let's all go for it. Let's promote the coda phrase. So PODA and SODA, Parks on the Air and Summits on the Air, and now we have VODA, right? Volunteers on the Air. Heard somebody this week, this last couple of days, calling out the CQ VODA. Are generally operations of less than 12 hours, and there's no overnight stay. So the intention is only to be there for a short period of time and then to move on. Versus CODA, which is my term, it's for constant or intermittent amateur radio operations over the course of at least 24 hours while resident at a campsite. That's just my definition. Because I'm coining the term, it's the right definition. So that's going to be what it is. And also one thing to keep in mind, a park may have campsites, but not all campsites are in parks. So I do boondock, which means I'm maybe in Bureau land management land, or I'm in a place which is not an official campsite, and I'm stealthily camping out. Not easy to stealthily camp out with a 16-foot whip on the car, but yeah, it happens. So it's not just operating out of a real official campsite. It's anywhere you decide to pitch your tent or live out of your car. What are the pros of it? So I will tell you, I live in South Seattle. So my noise level is about an S7, S8, S9. And so the old thing is, if you can hear them, you can work them. I can't hear anybody. But I do have a trick. So I will share this little trick with you. I shared it in all my amateur radio general and tech and extra classes. And that is, I've been using the websdr.org, and there's also kiwisdr, I believe, .org. And what I do is I grab an antenna, somebody's antenna for a receiver down in San Francisco area, around Northern California. And so I will listen on the internet through WebSDR, and I will transmit from my house. And that way I can actually not only hear what I sound like over the air, but also I can hear people that normally are just drowned out, and they might be able to hear me, but I can't get to them. So absolutely low RF noise levels. I've been in places where basically RF quiet. The only RF was basically me. However, I will tell you, if you're around RVs, lots of RF noise. Oh, yeah. So those inverters are the noisiest things, and plus they're all their LED lights, which you know are not always really FCC compliant. So if you find yourself stuck between two RVs, try to move. It's just going to be murder. You're going to see all the birdies across it. Also, no HOA. So if you live in an area where there's an HOA and you're very restricted, and maybe they figured out that flagpole really is an antenna and they told you to stop it, whatever you want to do, it doesn't have HOAs. It does expand your options. So one of the other things about a CODA operation, and then this goes for PODA as well, and field day, of course, but it expands your options. So if you're at home and you're in a lot where you basically have an end-fed half-wave 40-meter antenna, and that's all you can put up, then you're done. That's it. But when you're out in the field, you can decide to do a fan dipole. You can do horizontal or vertical fan dipoles. You can try different antennas and see how they work for you. You can even go with phased array antenna, which I can do with my portable setups, is a passive or active phased array antenna. So you have more options when you go out there, but there is a con to that. And then, of course, the last one, which is important for me, I get the stink blown off me. Really important to just get out, and get out of your environment, go out into nature. And it's not just sitting there in the park or sitting there at the campsite and playing radio all day. It's go for a walk, get out there in nature, go look at the beach, whatever you need to do. It's just get out of that space, because there's more to life, of course, than playing with radios. And also my ears get tired within about an hour with listening to HF. The cons, setup. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure many of you have gone camping, and when you're camping, it's either you're taking stuff out or you're putting stuff in. That is the majority of your life camping, right? And if you're like me, who doesn't like to stay normally in one place more than a day and a half when I'm on a road trip, it's constantly shuffling things in and out and around. You want to make dinner, it's easy. You got to pull everything out and then put everything back. You want to make a little breakfast, pull everything out, put everything back. So that's a con, because think about it, there's a lot of stuff where you're taking the radio and putting it out where you want to work, then you got to put it back in. Oh, you have to go to the bathroom and you're by yourself, so you got to put it back in, lock the car again, then come back from the bathroom. So it's a lot of that, and you have to sort of say, do I really want to do that? But the answer is, you decide what you want. Weight and space, really, really important. I could take everything, and I know I'm the only ham that wants to take everything with them. I know it's a unique thing. I'm probably the only one who decides to take 12 different antennas with me and 3 different radios, etc. The answer is it can take up a lot of weight and space. And when you're living out of, in my case, my minivan, when I'm doing this, it becomes very cramped in there if I take everything and my camera equipment. So you have to make the trade-off. So you can go from very, very simple to very, very complex, up to you. There's always the potential for theft. If you're camping and you leave your car, even if it's locked up, there's always potential to have your stuff stolen. I do recommend people, if you're going to do this on a regular basis, or even intermittently, to think about the ARRL insurance plan for your equipment, or get a rider on your insurance policy for it, because chances are it could get stolen. You become a visible target for people who just see you pulling equipment out and putting equipment in. They may not know what the equipment is, but it looks like it must cost money, so they could do something with it, right? So do think about that. And then investment, because when you think about it, when you want to operate with as much flexibility as possible, it means you're going to invest more into your equipment. So that could be as simple as lots of different wire antennas, or it could be as complex as you want something more structural. And we'll see a couple different examples of that. But again, it's a trade-off. You could make it as minimalistic as you want, or go nuts, and I have gone nuts, and make it as complex as you want. So those are the pros and cons from my point of view of CODA. By the way, I will stop from time to time. Feel free to ask a question at that point. Or if you want to share a brief experience, please do that as well. And we'll stop in a few minutes to check on that. But the bottom line, as I said, is if you're set up for field day, you're CODA ready. So whatever you do for field day, you're CODA ready. And so it's really about, and if you haven't done a field day, go do a field day. It is worth doing at least once in your career as a ham radio operator. In fact, I got my first field day with Roland and Lynn and Bruce. I think we're all out there together on Lions Rock. Great experience to have these experiences. I was a new ham, and having these seasoned veterans with me was very helpful. And then to see Lynn take out his wire potato gun launcher and launch a wire 250 feet across a bunch of trees, and then say, "Here's your antenna." I go, "Oh, well, good. What do I do with this?" So that was fun. So on one side, as I said, it can get very simple. SOTA is substance on the air, which means you're hiking with a backpack up to some mountaintop, and you're going to set up. So you can imagine that's going to have to be light and simple. Usually people are carrying 5 to 12 amp hour batteries. It's a QRP radio, sometimes as light as the new KH1, which is literally like a calculator in size, or something that's usually less than 2 pounds. Some of them as lighter than that, more in the 1 pound range. Usually you're carrying one antenna type. You have a very limited set of tools, if any tools at all, and the weight is over any option. So you lose versatility and flexibility for the fact that you have to carry it. And also think about, this is just some of the things, because you still have to, if you're packing, you still have to think about all the things you have to pack normally. even if you're going out for just a day hike, you want your emergency kit with you. I carry it when I used to do this, 24-hour pack would always be with me so I could bivouac if I needed to in an emergency. You want to have something you can sit on that's comfortable. You want stuff that you can write with, et cetera. So like waterproof notebooks. Hopefully we're not operating in the rain, but that can, just nice to have if you got into that trouble. POTA, parks on the air, which is basically what you stick in your car. It's as close to code as you're going to get. It's 12 to 30 amp hour batteries. You can go QRP to 100 watts. You usually have 1 to 2 antenna types possible. Maybe you have an antenna support structure with you. An optional, and then you could have your computer with you and then a little additional sets of tools. The biggest thing you can see here is it's changing as you take bigger batteries, generally speaking. Some people stay with the smaller batteries, but if you're like me, you have an bigger battery if you're just pulling it out on a picnic bench, it's nice to have a bigger battery and not worry about it. And then having the option to go 100 watts. I will often have the choice for myself. I have a G90, a Zygo G90, which I just got recently, 20 watts maximum SSB. And then I have my FT991A, which is 100 watts. I use both in the field. I use the 100 watt one in the field anytime I'm going to be involved in a contest or field day, because everything is so busy, the 20 watts doesn't really break through very well. I don't want to work so hard. I go with the 100 watts. And then if you're in the car with CODA, then it's one large or multiple batteries. You have a charging system with you, usually solar, or if you want a generator. Again, up to 100 watts, or, I guess the sky's the limit. People have taken out kilowatt stations if you want. I would not be towing a generator behind me, but okay. Computer, internet access. Sometimes we'll use a phone as a hotspot if you have it, or the computer can get Wi-Fi directly at the campsite. You can potentially have as many antennas you want to carry with you. And on a VHF contest, I have a 15-element Yagi for 2 meters, and it goes up on a mast, and I can use that, and that's kind of ridiculous, but I do. And then you need antenna support or antenna supports and extra tools up to the kitchen sink. So the bottom line is you can make this and you can take everything you do for SOTA, stick it in the car and go camping. That's just as valid. You don't have to go to the other extreme. It just shows you the different extremes from one side to the other of what you can do. But the thing I really want to stress here is safety, because I go do this a lot myself. I'm alone most of the time, so I have to be considered as safety. Yes, that is a real setup. That is me camping somewhere with a 30-foot mast and about a 16-foot, 20-meter, or 32-foot, 20-meter dipole, and I think I have a hamstick on this as well for another hamstick dipole for probably 40. And you can see there's a mast, there's guy wires and such. But it's really important to think about safety. First, you may think like an 18-year-old, like me, but your body may be a lot older. So I know we always think, sort of like, have you ever had that situation where the mind is saying go and the legs are going, who the hell are you talking to? They're not moving. The brain's going, yeah, and the legs are going, nope, sit down. You're not that guy. Okay, so it's important, and this is when I used to teach EMTs. This is one of the first rules I always taught my EMTs. Take a breath, clearly see the situation, understand your limits, think it through, give it another thought, then act. Or I used to call this the 1 foot up in the air rule, where I'd have them, you're running, you're excited new EMT, you get off the rig and you start running towards the scene, and I say, when you get that leg, that first leg is starting to move in the running position, keep it up in the air. And don't let it down until you've assessed what's going on here. Because that's how people die, by just running off willy-nilly. It's easy for us to say, we got this covered, and that's about the much thinking that we have. So it's really worthwhile, take the moment to think things through. I know you all know this. Okrent's Law. You can quote me on this, it's official, and this is another thing I'm trying to start a meme on, so please push it out with my name. Okrent's Law. Anything that could slip out of your hands will do so in a way and at a time that directly or indirectly will damage the item and or some other critical piece, cause an injury to you or someone else, and or be lost and end operations. I will guarantee you that will be, one of those conditions will occur at least once on every, there's a corollary to that. Whatever you forget will be important for your operation, and you won't realize it until you get there. Okay? So the other thing I like to keep in mind is what goes up, including you, has the potential to come down in an uncontrolled fashion. Okay. Gravity loves to help. So we always used to say the body assumes its most comfortable position relative to gravity, which is the grounded state. So, and I know it sounds like it's funny, but I've made the mistakes. I've tried to lift that mast up when stuff is on it and had to go thinking I could do it. I couldn't do it. RF safety is still a thing in the field. We do, remember, this is a big thing now about RF safety calculations, especially for our operations, but this still applies to being in the field. And, you know, for you, if you've ever been involved in large field day operations, like at Mike and Key, where I'm a member, I'm the activities manager for Mike and Key, by the way. Please come to our swap meet. We have a person whose only designation is safety officer. They not only have safety operations of setting up all the masts and everything, but they do the safety calculations for the entire setup. And asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's an indicator of high intelligence. I know. What is that? I'm a man. What's the red green? I don't ask for help. Actually, you need to ask for help. I've asked strangers to help me in raising masts because I'm alone most of the time, and if I'm crazy enough to put up a mast when I'm alone, I have to ask for help. Otherwise, see rule number 3 and 4. Okay. So when you're thinking about the kit, let me stop here. Anybody have any comments, questions, or brief experiences they want to share?
Yeah, I was up. Big Brian and I were up. You know Brian?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were up hunting one year. We were up 7,000 feet, 6,000 feet. Nothing was happening, so we started digging all the radios out. And we shot antenna in a tree. We did this, got all ready to go, and I didn't have a barrel connector. After 45 minutes of setting everything up, all excited, got the chairs in place, went to connect to, I damn near cut the line. I was going to do twist ties. I was so frustrated. And we just looked at each other. We just grabbed a beer, tore it all back down again. I have 5 of them now in my go-to.
Every part of the car has one. I know that feeling. Yep. So given what antenna you'll need and how long you'll operate, that's the given here. When you're thinking about SOTA operations, you need to know ahead of time what you're going to do because everything you're packing in, right? You got to think about it. So you need a radio. ATU is optional. Some people have antennas that they don't really need ATUs. They more or less get the 50 ohm impedance they need. And that works fine. Nothing wrong with that. A wire for the antenna, a coil or a whip, a hamstick bound, whatever you need to set that up. A pole or throw line if that's necessary, a feed point and coax, the usual stuff. Batteries, rope and 10 stakes, first aid kit and plastic bags, hammer, backpack, tote, or case, something to sit on, water and food. Hey, that's already heavy and I haven't even added, a raincoat and gloves. So just understand why weight is the real thing here. And when you're doing this is can see that, where we would normally, let's say at home, set up a 14 gauge wire for our antennas if we're doing a wire antenna. Here we're talking down into the, 20 gauge wires on QRP. Go ahead.
Where's the purple sock?
Stay tuned.
Is it in your presentation?
I didn't use the purple sock because I have orange guy lines.
Okay.
But why don't you tell everybody about the purple sock?
Yeah, Lynn and I were at the Red Cross on a 5th Saturday and making contact. Some of you heard the story, making contact with Camp Swampy, as we call it down there in Olympia. And, you guys sound terrible. It's just, we found out later on we had a problem with that antenna. So Lynn goes in, grabs a deal of wire, I think it was 22 gauge, hands me a purple sock, says, go fill it full of gravel. So I went fill it full of gravel, brought it back over, he tied a knot in it. He said, now swing it around and get it over that tree. So I got it over the tree, brought the wire back down, cut it, put it on the tuner, everything like that, called him, so I don't know what you did, but you sound magnificent. And I just thought, oh my God. And the antenna I just spent $300 for, I could have bought a 29 cent purple sock and had the same big success.
The reason I have a purple sock is because I have a 16-ounce fishing weights, and I have my orange guy line ties to it, or my mason line ties to it, and I throw that in a tree. We'll get to that. So instead of, because, I'm too lazy to, this, because then I have to empty the sock, wash the sock. But things, when you're doing soda, everything's smaller, so that's helpful. And we'll get into that poll in a little bit. But the basics for, the basics are up to the sky, because I can't see because of the things here, but extra batteries, a charging method, a buck booster. I am big on buck boosters these days. So what the best buck booster does is it maintains 13.6 volts or thereabouts as best it can when your battery is at 12.6 or lower. So when your battery, most of our batteries are like lead acid, LiPo batteries are about 12.6. And so you need to get the full power out of your rig, you need 13 volts, 13.6 volts. So I use a buck booster to bring that up to 13.6. Now, if you're doing QRP, that's really affordable to get a buck booster. For probably $25, you get a buck booster that'll handle the 10 amps you need for most QRP. Well, I also operate 100 watts in the field, so the buck booster I have, I was so lucky to get this one on auction. It's an MFJ buck booster. I just recently took a look at what a new one costs. It's $237. Mine costs $50, so I'm very happy. It handles 30 amps, and it has an RF switch in it, so you can actually put the signal in through a T to the buck booster, and when it sees that you're transmitting, it shifts over to 13.6 volts out, and when it's not, it cuts back to the normal battery. It just gives you a battery at 12.6. And that way you can extend the life of the battery a little bit than having it constantly at 13.6. But it is expensive. But again, if you're running 100 watts and you want to get maximum power, you need to do that. What I do oftentimes before I did that was I ran my 100 watt rig most of the time on 50 watts. And then if I really needed to break through and I was having trouble, I'd momentarily go up to 100 watts. Now, of course, at 100 watts, it's not 13 volts. It's really not putting out 100 watts. It's putting out less. Toolkit to support your operations. Antenna parts, wire, electrical tape, rope, cable, the usual stuff, crimps, hardware to handle builds and field repairs. Some knowledge of the terrain and weather you're going to encounter at your campsites to help you select the right antennas. I'm still learning that whenever I camp in the winter in the Seattle area, or in the Western Washington area, it's going to be a lake around my car. I keep forgetting that. And the other day, I drove in, had this great ideas for what I was going to test out, realized that nowhere I was going to drive was not going to be a lake at that campsite. Second time, Ocean Shores campsite down the street, I've done that one, swamp in the winter. So just keep that in mind. Do you have an HT, a dual band or single band HT? If you do, program it for the local repeaters around you and have that ready. Because if you need help, it means at least you have one avenue for help. Because a lot of times where I'm camping, there's no cell phone service, or it's very weak. But I can sometimes get to some of the local repeaters. And I carry, it's really quick for me to throw a Yagi up, a 3-element Yagi up if I need to. And I can do that. I have a J-pole that rolls up for when I'm hiking that I can throw up into a tree. So I use that as a backup as well. More coax, 10 stakes, skylines, antenna sports. You can see it's getting crazy. Multimeter antenna analyzer, plastic wrap, duct tape, a towel, peanuts, scarf, and rubber bands are very handy to have. I'll give you points if anyone understands what it means, why I have towel, peanuts, and scarf in italics. Anyone have that idea? Am I the only real geek here? Okay, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is towel and peanuts. You must always have your towel and peanuts. The towel is just a useful device. Peanuts, if you're ever going to be hitchhiking, you need to have the peanuts to restore your electrolytes. And a scarf is for Doctor Who. Okay, so there you go. If I went Star Trek next, then you'd know who I am. Okay, inverter, soldering iron, and solder if you're doing it. By the way, if you were to actually take the tarp from the back of my car off, behind the third seat, you would see all of this in totes, plus half my camping equipment sitting there, and it's always there. 2 reasons why it's always there. It makes it easier for me to go camping whenever I want, and 2, it's also part of my earthquake kit. So both our cars are set up to have their own earthquake kits, where the minivan actually has the ability to carry a tent and have the whole family live out of the minivan if we have to. Go ahead.
Suggestion for soldering iron in the field, butane.
Yeah.
Yeah, the butane soldering iron, because it's 110's not going to do a hoop.
Well, it's okay for me because I carry a large battery and inverter. So,
Okay.
but yeah, butane is a great one, and I've seen it used, and I have no complaints about butane. And just that I have, I didn't have to buy a new soldering iron. I have everything I need, so. I was cheap, I didn't want to have anything, no special tool. So this is my G90 Go kit. It sits in an ammo case. And what you have in there is the 12 amp hour battery, a buck booster, the G90, which is 20 watts QRP and has an ATU installed. 120 volt AC charger, so when I'm home I plug it in, or if I'm in the car I plug it in to charge while I'm driving. The manual laminated cheat sheet, notepad and pen, audio cable for an external speaker. And basically, you're seeing on the left the whole Go kit, and you're seeing on the right when it's sitting in my car on a tray and I'm operating from the back seat, and the battery is off on the floor of the car coming up, and there's a 16-foot whip coming out of the top of my car that I have a screw on to an adapter on an NMO mount that I can then screw the whip on, and I have a 16-foot radial that wraps around, that's always wrapped around my roof rack. So when I screw in a 20-meter dipole, or 20-meter vertical, it's ready to go on 20 meters. So there are people who tell you you don't have to do that because the car itself becomes the radial or the counterpose, but it's not going to be as efficient. And the reason for that is it's like a mag mount. If you don't have a physical connection, it's like a mag mount. You have a capacitive coupling. So if you don't have a physical connection to the car for the ground radial, then you're going to have capacitive coupling. Will it work? Absolutely. Is it as efficient as having at least one wire that's actually physically attached? No. It's the physical wire is going to be better. And I can tell you, and it also acts as a tie-in point. I'll throw for longer wires off if I need to for 40 meters or whatever. The 20-meter vertical works really well because I can use that as an oversized, because 10 meters is an harmonic. So I don't even have to change the 16-meter length, the 16-foot length. I'll just use it on 10 meters. It tunes up fine, and I make good contacts. So kind of think of it as almost like a 5/8 wave for 10 meters. Okay, I'm going to go a little faster now because I talk too much. Carbon fiber mass, light there, but the thing to keep in mind is that when you buy a carbon fiber mass, if you're buying one for 25 feet, you're not going to have 25 feet that's usable. Okay, unless you're using the 20-gauge wire. But if you start using any weight on that, the last 1/6 or 1/3 is so fragile and so thin, it really doesn't, it'll just start bending. And that's okay. A lot of these things have lots of bend in it, but you're not going to get the full height. So don't think, I'm going to have 40 meters on this and it's going to, or whatever, it's going to be this height. It's not going to work. It's going to be bent down in somewhere else. It's okay, just so you know. And so I don't plan, when I use my mass, I know that I'm not using, in fact, I oftentimes will take out those last two sections and just put them to the side for some other use somewhere down the line because I don't use them. But I will tell you on these extendable telescoping fiberglass masks, you do need to use electrical tape or rubberized hose clamps to keep them from collapsing because it does there. If you remember, if you've seen these before, you pull them out and you twist to lock them in place. It's a really bad lock. In any weight, they'll collapse on themselves. So I put electrical tape, or if you're going to use one of these for a long period of time, then I would get the rubberized hose clamps. And you clamp just above where the joint is so that it can lock it in place. But again, these are fragile, so you don't want to get too tight. They're great for wire verticals, and I've used them for horizontal whips and stick dipoles, but you have to go lower and lower to the ground because they just can't handle the weight. But they're not bad, especially if you're staying with wire verticals. And I'll tell you, one of the things I used to do with them is I would have my wire coming down. I put a loading coil in the center point, and then the wire coming back down. So the only thing was really weight was the loading coil, and that was low enough usually at a wider section of the fiberglass. Thicker fiberglass, they're my preference. The upper section also is still too thin, but you could sometimes use it. And I've used these to support 3 hamstick dipoles and a 20-meter telescoping whip dipole. So I have 3 hamsticks at the top each offset by about 60 degrees from each other, and then I have a 20-meter full-size dipole, telescoping whip dipole down lower, and I've done this with the fiberglass mass with the thicker ones. Works fine. Very, very heavy. You have to be very, very careful when you're lifting that into position. Painter's poles work fine. A lot of people have used painter's poles. Pinterpole is really, really, really handy if you're doing VHF and UHF. Getting that extra, getting 10 feet or 15 feet with a light antenna works fine. And generally a tripod and a guy, and generally for any mast, you're going to need a tripod, guy wires to make sure you're safe and stable. So typical masts, MFJ masts, you can see there's carbon fiber that goes down to 3.75 feet, but goes out to 33 feet. Again, think of that last almost 10 feet maybe not usable if you're doing anything with weight. There's also one that collapses down to 6 feet. It's fiberglass, which means it's got a thicker and it's stiffer so that you can use more of it. A carpy, I always use a crappy pole, but it's not. It's a carpy pole, as I think is the way it's pronounced. I actually have one of these in my Go kit as well, and it's again, you can see it below. It's really nice for soda. They can collapse down to 12 inches, some of them. They can go out to 20 feet. And they have they can bend really, really well. And they're very light. So you can stick them in a lot of places, like, put them in a branch of a tree, tie them off and have them, or tie them to run a small, something to hold them up and run a vertical. I've seen people run these off a cliff and dangle the wire down off a cliff. So lots of different things you can do, and it's kind of versatile. Tripods, I don't own the military. This was very popular for a while. I think I think we don't see a lot of these, but for swap meets, these were really about 5 years ago or more. They were really, really popular. They were on lots of surplus on the market. And these are the military surplus tent poles with a tripod set up. The tripod was something that was made by people. They didn't actually come with that. It was because they weren't meant to be antennas. But the pole sets are really nice. They're fiberglass or steel or aluminum. Really, really well constructed, heavy. But they're great, but they are heavy and it's hard to use. If you're by yourself, you have to push your mast up from the bottom, and it's very difficult to do that alone. People do it, but I don't. It would end up with me and it not in a good shape, because it gets, more higher you go, the heavier it gets, of course. I use a roof tripod with all my masts. That's the one on if you're watching at your top left where it says roof tripod, there, it's even, and these are all staked down to the ground. The roof tripods are staked to the ground. I use a camera tripod where I take off the head, and I have a PVC tube that mounts to that, and then I can mount a tie point for a wire vertical antenna I'm throwing in a tree, or most likely for a telescoping whip and a loading coil, and radials coming off the back. I have used this when I go car camping when I'm flying to where I'm going. So if I'm flying to, I was telling Roland, a couple of years ago I went out to camp around Arizona, driving around Arizona for about 2 weeks. And I had one suitcase with clothes and stuff, and the other suitcase was radio, tent and radio equipment, and there was a tripod, and I could stop at a campsite, throw things up, pull it down, go back out. Instead of using camera tripod, now I have three 20-foot, 7-foot tall, three $20, 27-foot tall light stands. Being an amateur photographer, light stands were common for me, so it was really easy. These are really nice. They can be made to be very, very steady. They take sandbags really well, but also they can extend up to 7 feet really, really easy on a spring load. So it's really helpful when you want to get that coil up in the air. You want to do an elevated vertical, really nice to get that up there and use it. It's more effective than the camera tripod, because most camera tripods can't go as high as that can. But again, as I said, you need sandbags or rope and tent stakes to secure the tripod. And you have to think about how you're securing the side tripod, because if the ground is too soft and you've got tent stakes, it's not going to hold very well. So you may have to put in tie downs or sandbags for that. Also, do your shopping. You want to go out to Gigaparts and get a roof tripod? Great, $95. You want to go to Amazon? $39, same roof tripod. So think about where you're buying it from. Just because it's being sold from a radio group company doesn't mean that you're getting the best price. Okay, and if you want to go crazy, you can play with PVC pipe. In fact, this is one of the things I was going to play with when I was out there. You can make a quad pod if you want out of PVC. Basically a 4-legged tripod, which makes it a quad pod. And you can adjust it for whatever size you want. What you're seeing on the left is actually something I have that has that's used in 2 different ways. One is if I have my own telescoping whip that I made that this fits in much better. It actually sits on top of my car, ties to my roof rack, and I can drop my homemade telescoping whip in because it's broader band and has a capacitive hat on it. And also I have a large piece of plastic. I get scrap plastic and I can mount it very quickly to the plastic, stick it down the ground, and now I have a vertical on the ground again. So you can do a lot with PVCs. In fact, there it is, right? There's one version of that. I take that telescoping mast with a capacitive hat and I can stick it on the ground with radials, just like that, or just let this sit on the car and use it that way. But this is the one you see in the picture that is screwed into a 3/8 by 24-inch thread on an adapter on an NMO mount. And that's the one where the radial is on the roof rack. So if you go to Tap Plastics, there's a couple of Tap Plastics in the area, one in Bellevue, one in Seattle, one in Bellevue's I go to. They have a scrap bin. And I periodically go in there to scrap bin, and they have for $5 a 12 by 12 piece of 1/4-inch, nice plastic, great to use. I put holes in for stakes. I can run screws in for radials with aluminum stock, not aluminum stock, it's that perforated aluminum band stuff. Just put it on the bottom. That's what's on the bottom of the white. And, people go, well, don't use plastic, it'll be killed by UV. Yeah, in about 20 years. Don't worry about it. It's $5 a piece of plastic. It works fine. Leave it alone. So, and then this is the thing about masts, as I said, it's a moment arm. And this is really, really important. It doesn't look like that's a lot of weight. If you're putting something on a mast like 2 dipole hamstick or a telescoping whip, anything that's going to have any weight at the top, and I'm talking any weight like a pound or more, I guarantee you it is going to not feel great when it starts to come down, because M equals FD. It doesn't look very heavy when it's straight up and down. You can do this, but once it starts moving, it's going to get really, really hard to hold on to. That's how I damaged my 80-meter hamstick, because it started to come down, and I did not take precautions for that, and so, because I was stupid enough to have it extended fully when I was, instead of in the mast, in the tripod before I extended it, and so what goes up comes down. So be aware of that. Guidelines, and this is really important, should be bright colors, and consider caution tape around the antenna perimeter as well. Also at night, even though I'm in a campsite, if I have a mast up, I bring them, unless it's something the minute I stop running, I will bring the mast down to a lower condition so that if anything happens at night, it doesn't end up falling on the car or anywhere else. It's a little bit less place. Also, the reason for the bright color guidelines is you don't want people walking into them, okay? Now you think, like, who walks into guidelines? If they're black, you can't see them at night, I guarantee you. Not like a guideline, but this really happened. One of the guys who used to work with me back in a different company didn't report to work one day. Turned out, the dog ran out of the house in the middle of the night. He went chasing the dog, didn't remember that the clothesline is right there, ran straight into the clothesline and killed himself. So if you don't think guy lines that are tight can kill, yes, they can. That's why they need to be bright. That's why you need to make sure that they're clearly marked. Okay, now for the cautionary tale. This is, like I said, a carbon fiber mast supported by a ground stake and roof tripod with guy lines, so that's exactly what I've been talking about. Would I say this within electrical safety? I wasn't paying as much attention as I could have, but I was only running 20 watts at that time, so it wasn't as big a deal. But, technically, if it was 100 watts, I'd have to think about, okay, it's HF, probably at least 30 minutes I would have before I should take a break. Also, when you're using a telescoping whip, is a dipole formation, and this is usually the hamsticks you don't need to, but if you're using, like I do, a 16-foot telescoping whips on each side, you do need to make sure that you have support structure for those whips so they don't droop. Is it okay for them to droop? Absolutely, it's okay for droop, but, here's the but, will it cause stress on the joint where it comes to the mast and where it goes to the feed point? Yes. So that's why although I don't have to, the less stress on that fitting, the better from my point of view if I want longevity. So it doesn't take long to put up a rope, some zip ties, and even electrical tape and create a strain relief for the whip. This is all the thing. When you're using electrical tape and it's temporary, fold over the last 1/8 of an inch so it becomes a tab to take it off later. Okay. I got taught that when I was from my emergency room nurse, who used to be an OVAR nurse, and she would say, always when you're taping your trays to close them before sterilization, leave an 1/8" tab. And I'd say, why is that? Because when you're in the OR, you don't break your nails trying to get the tape off. I said, okay, thanks. This is the 16-foot, this is the 15 element, I think, VHF Yagi that I have used in the field. And this is on a metal mast, and you can see here on the right side all the different guy wires coming into that point to support it. This is a hamstick dipole. You might hear this as an octopus. So those who've seen that, this, if you don't want to spend $100 for an octopus, you can make, this is basically these, one of these is commercial, 2 of these are commercial, 1 of these I made. So they're not hard to make. And again, these are hamstick dipoles, or you can use them for telescoping whips as well. But they're hamstick dipoles, and I set them up, they're about 60 degrees off from each other, so they have reduced their interference with each other. And because they're a fan dipole, essentially, you can put them all in the same feed line, because they'll have the impedance, the signal will go to the lowest impedance. Will you have some reciprocal energy transfer to the other lines? Yes, some will be there, and they will do some radiation as well. And then the picnic table is my step stool, which you also need to do if you're doing anything with a mast. You need a step stool, at least a step stool, or a small ladder, because you won't get to it. You won't be able to reach very quickly up to the right height, at least for me. These I have not used, but I'm sure you're familiar with drive-on masts and masts that go off the back of the car. The key thing to remember about those is that you're next to a large body of metal. So your antenna is going to be affected by that. And, it's just the nature. And so you may find that what you tuned at home when it was freestanding by itself may be slightly different than when you get to when it's mounted next to the car, because the car itself is going to affect that antenna. Yes, go ahead.
I use the trailer hitch stuff all the time for my Tar Heel antennas.
Yeah.
And when I first got them, they didn't work with beams. And when I called the Tar Heel people themselves, they said, you fell into the same trap as everybody else. We will guarantee that we will buy your antenna back for double what you paid for it if you put on suitable grounding from that mast to your body and to your chassis, and we will guarantee that it will work. And boy, they were spot on.
That is actually a great point when dealing with mobile, is that people don't realize that you have to have a good grounding system for mobile. Not every part of the car you think that's grounded is grounded. And so you find yourself, people who do this really want their mobiles to work well, they run braid under their car and tie it off to different places to ensure that everything's connected properly.
That is exactly what I have. And the other thing they said is one of the worst offenders, especially on a diesel, is the exhaust pipe and muffler, because they are a lot of times are isolated electrically. Mm-hmm. So you need to not only ground the exhaust pipe, but the muffler and the clamps, and you'll get rid of all that diesel injection noise and computer noise. And when I did that with a temporary, like battery cables, just to see what the difference was, oh Lord, what a difference it made.
And if anyone ever tells you that you can buy a no radial vertical, don't do that. No vertical should operate. Yes, you can operate a vertical without radials, but the efficiency is really, really bad. You have to have radials or counterpoise with vertical if you want any type of efficiency. So when they say, this vertical doesn't need radials, it's bullshit. It does if you want to get optimal performance. Okay, enough of that. This is something that I have thought about putting one up a vertical like this in the hitch or on the ground at the back of the car. And what I did was I've designed a stabilizer that goes on the roof rack so that it reduces a lot of the wobble from that location. Because if you get a lot of wobble at any single like that on that mast going down the hitch, any kind of wobble will start to wear on that hitch. And so what this does is stabilize the antenna and keeps it from wobbling around. And Harbor Freight has 20-foot flagpoles that will fit this, and Petros will work on these things too. At the Red Cross, we have 2 of these in the emergency trailer for being drive-up mass. Let's see. Oh, speaking about radials, by the way, why am I talking about verticals so much lately? Is because I am following rule number 1. My brain is 18, but my body is not. And I'm finding it harder and harder for me to deal with mass all the time. And so I'm switching a lot to verticals. Another reason, I can't get the mass high enough to really get the kind of low angle takeoff I like for DX. And verticals can do that. And yes, there are more losses in the ground vertical, but it's better than not being able to really handle an antenna well. I just can't do it physically, so I've been moving more to verticals. This was one of my first verticals on the far left. It's basically a low coil with a 16-foot whip. It is the prototype for what you'll see in a few minutes called the porcupine box. And then there's a 1-to-1 Balam and an RF choke that's coming out of the end point of that. And the one that's next to it is a elevated vertical. What's the difference? We'll see. Remember, base loaded means they're more loaded. That is, base loaded being the coil is at the base, means there's more losses, but you need more radials. If you elevate the coil more towards the middle or even higher, you'll have less losses. You need less radials, but they have to be tuned. Every radial has to be tuned. So a ground radial system does not have to be tuned. So when you hear people say, you have to have a 40-meter radial on the ground and a 20-meter radial on the ground, no, don't have to do that. Okay, I can give you, if anyone has questions that, tell them to see me, I'll get all the data for them. The general rule of principle is that if you're about 10% of a lambda at the lowest frequency, you're fine. If you put out longer radials, will it hurt? No, it won't hurt. Do your losses go down a little bit? Yes, they probably do. Is there a point of diminishing returns? Yes. What about more radials? Very simply, the more radials you get, the longer they have to be. And there's a point of diminishing returns around, really the break point is about 32, but 16 to 32 is where most people call it. But you can go up to 120 radials if you want. They get really, really long. And they have the least amount of losses. But most people, especially for camping, why did I go with, in my case, 6.5-foot radial wires? Because that's what fits into a tent site at a tent pad at a campsite. And it happens to get me to the lowest frequency at 10% of lambda is around 40 meters, which is where I generally work down to. So, on the other one, you have tune radials, which means I have to put up radials for each band. And the rule of thumb, they'll tell you, well, you only need 2 per. Yes, you could get away with 2 per. If you read the data, it says 8 per band on an elevated radial, on an elevated vertical. Nobody does that. It's just too much wire to put out there. So if you get 4 out there, great. 2, okay. But I haven't seen anyone use the rule of the rules. And then here you can see the close-up of the elevated one with the loading coil, the whip, and the Balam and the RF choke. Again, by bringing it up, I reduce the losses. And it's more efficient than a ground-based antenna. This is a close-up of what's called the crow's nest. It's something I built specifically for my light stands to do elevated antennas, elevated verticals. And you can see it attaches to my light stand, and it has 4 radial points and 4 tie-down points. The rings are the tie-down points. So if I need to stabilize it, I can tie that guy lines down to stake those down to stabilize it, the radials, and then a 16-foot whip on that, and then a coax. And these are, there's one bag in the back of my car that contains all these different types of antennas. This was an earlier version of the crow's nest. Here I'm using plexiglass, and I've touched a notch in it, and I've used some clamps and some right angles to secure it. Again, there's 2 screws here for radials. By the way, if you have an MFJ coil, this doesn't look like the MFJ coil exactly. The reason is because the wire connector is different. I changed their crappy alligator clip to a Pomona clip. And so that really locks on really, really well and stays where it is. So I use that. So we talked about loaded verticals. I think we already went through that. Yes, we did. So loading coils narrow, but the thing about narrowing coils is they narrow the bandwidth. So that's the nature of, when you hear the Q of the coil, that's actually one of the things that the higher the Q, the narrower the bandwidth of the coil is. And so what's really important is to understand that the loading coils will narrow the bandwidth, which means you're going to, if you're going to use an ATU, it means that you're not going to get from across the entire band with that setting the lowest SWR. Your ATU will help you get there, but it's not going to, remember, an ATU is what you use to match impedance. It does not tell you anything about the propagation characteristics of the antenna. So if you're not the right resonance for that antenna, it doesn't matter. Yes, you may be transferring the power there, but you don't know how well it's radiating. So if you have a loading coil, that's why you may have to change it in different positions to get the best resonance for your antenna for the band that you're working with. Or just accept it's a compromise where you are. If you set it for the middle of the band or where you're going to operate, and then let the ATU do its work, but knowing that you're not going to get optimal propagation at all times. Because who wants to go out of the car every 5 minutes when you're changing bands? So again, I have a 16-foot whips. Why do I like that? I like to work 20 a lot. And so I use a 16-foot whip because it's more broader band than a ham stick, and it's something I can manage. I have MFJ commercial. There's also AliExpress has them now too. They're pretty cheap. Telescoping whips. But I also made my own, and it's got a wider diameter. And I also accept a capacitive hat, so I can have more bandwidth, even than the regular. And you can see on the right, I'm using a ham stick there at the yurt. Let's see. And for digression, I'll really go through this really quick. I don't know what time, how much time do I have left? Have I gone over time already? Because usually I do. Corey, 5 more minutes?
Sure.
Good, take me 15 minutes then. This was something I was playing with when I started playing with verticals. This is basically, you can recognize it's an electrical utility box. Screwed a bunch of holes in it, put a bunch of screws in it and said, oh, there you go. Good, you throw it on the ground. By the way, there's an extra big hole I drilled in there. I pounded a stake in there so it stays on the ground. And then I throw out radials on it. And I thought, oh, that works out well. But I thought, got to have a Mark II. If that's a prototype, then what's Mark II? So Mark II became this. And I can put 4 radials out, or I can double up and put 8, or triple, quadruple up and put 16 if I want. The nice thing about it, it's got the coax is already there, and it's a right angle connector, so it's very helpful. And accepts ham sticks, wires, telescoping whips, whatever. I get ring terminals on a wire and screw it in, and there I go, throw it up in the tree. It's a tie point. This is, when you start playing with plastic, there's a right angle RF connector, UHF connector on the bottom of that for the coax. And this is, 16 radials tying in. It's a little bit more convenient because it goes in flat versus the other one's not so flat. And you can see the aluminum underneath the plastic, which is connecting everything. But, then you get carried away and you begin melding things together. So the one on the far right is got the radials. It's a cleaner look than the one on the far left. And the one on the right is, you don't always have to use all the other radials, so you can just throw that out there. And there's, not shown here, there's holes in the corners for the TED stakes. And so I get carried away. But then I get really carried away. And what you're looking at is somebody was, the DX commander, if you're familiar with the DX commander. So someone put a ham stick commander out there, which is basically, I said, okay, that's easy enough. Here's a ham stick commander. So you can see there's a place for 5 ham sticks if you want. Are they too close together? Yes, they are too close together. Is the DX commander lines too close together? Yes, they're too close together. Does it work? Absolutely. Is it better if it was a full rate, full height antenna? Yes, but this is, throw it on the ground, throw in the hand sticks, put a coax on, go for it, go on to something else. So it depends on how much effort you want to put on it. And also, I get fixated. This is what happens when I get fixated. But wait, I still get more fixated. So I said, well, gee, what if I eliminated, how many feed points can I eliminate? Because I run verticals, I run horizontals, I run ups, downs, sideways. So I took the original prototype and said, well, what if I had one feed point to rule them all? And this became the porcupine antenna platform. And you can see it actually has a balun in it. It's a 1-to-1 balun that's removable. I can stick any other balun I want in it, or not use the balun and run an external balun for something. So it becomes a tie-in point. You see there's a hook. I can raise it up and make a simple dipole, vertical or horizontal, or a fan dipole, vertical or horizontal. And you can see it's deployed on the ground on the left. It has a PVC support tube that goes in the bushing to help it from, again, wobbling. And by the way, if you get RADCOM from the Radio Society of Britain, you will see this in this 2024. This will be written up in one of their magazines. So they took the article on it. So it's a very handy thing. Looks good. People don't understand it, but it works well. I use it all the time. I actually have my prototype one actually has a second UHF connector on it that automatically has the bypass. So if I want to tune on bypass or run an external balun that's like a 64-to-1 or whatever, I don't have to rewire the balun in the field. But that's it works well. I use it in fact, it's pretty much my go-to antenna in the car all the time. I have a 16-foot whip in the car all the time with this and my G90, and that's my casual operation unit. In fact, speaking about casual operations, here's me at Flaming Geyser State Park doing a little POTA kind of thing. In this case, this is my homemade telescoping antenna. It's wider, so it has a little bit more bandwidth. Also, this has got a capacitive hat on it, which makes it, I can make it lower, I can make it less height. The reason it has a capacitive hat, because I could have gone to 16 foot, is because it breaks in the middle for accepting the loading coil. And so therefore, I can do 40 meters on this easily, or even 80 meters on this easily. And then again, when I do that, I want it on the ground because it's not going to be it's very steady on the car. Although there are guy supports, guy rings at the top of that antenna, so I can tie it down. I'm just throwing that out there. Little digressions. Me and my playing with verticals. This is how I operated this last couple of days. Is like this. This is my homemade telescoping antenna. I do not have machines at home, so otherwise I would have machined a beautiful interface for this, but I don't, so I have to be kludgy. But what you see here is the screws for these antennas. These are about 38-inch telescoping antennas that you can get on eBay. Number 3 long threaded rods, M3s, and you can see the guy ring tie-off points there. And then where it screws in at the bottom for the 3/8/24 adapter if I want to use that. So I can, and that doesn't collapse down small, it's about 6 feet when it collapses, but it's bigger, sturdier, and it has a little bit more bandwidth. Oh, and this one, Roland will never remember, this was operating a Red Cross net during when we were doing the exercise at the fire station with the Weyerhaeuser box. And I was operating the net with my roll-up J-pole hanging off my motorcycle. And that collapses down into like that big, and and it was just in my bags, and whoop, went up. So, you get to have fun. This is the nice thing about playing with antennas. It's one of the, making an antenna is like a Jedi making their lightsaber, right? So there you go. This is a throw lines. Roland talked about a throw line. This is a standard thing that a lot of people like to use as an arborist throw line. Basically, it is rope and a weight. That's what it is. What you want to do is have a weight that's sufficient enough to go down, not get caught in the tree. And I use a fishing line and a mason line. I will tell you, back to rule, whatever goes up in the air comes down, is you have to be careful, because if you throw it wrong, any of these things wrong, they end up doing one of two things. They either work correctly, or they swing back and hit you in the head. Okay? So it's really important you keep track of how you're throwing it. If it's too light, if you get one that's too light, it'll start wrapping itself around the tree and you're done. And if you don't tie it off correctly, you throw it up and it'll go somewhere you'll never find it again. But in most cases, if you throw it correctly, it'll come down, you'll tie your line to it, and up it goes. You can also use a drone, you can use the potato gun, you can use a slingshot, whatever. Some people use bow and arrows. I don't recommend, but some people can. I'm not that kind of person. Feed points, all sorts of different ways you can have feed points. You can get commercial feed points, you can make your own. Some feed points with built-in balance, some feeds without. So again, you want to have 1 or 2 in your kit that you can play with and decide what you want to do with it. If you're going to set up an antenna, inverted V or horizontal, etc. 10 stakes, I go with 1/4-inch diameter 10 stakes. I don't fool around with light, small, 10 stakes that you get in commercial tents. They don't hold down very well. And then I don't carry a hammer. I do carry a hammer for other things, but I carry a handheld sledge, because nothing works better on a 10 stake than a handheld sledge. Just make sure you have something to pull back up with. These are my guy lines on the right. I have orange guy lines so they can be seen. And I have pulleys that I can throw up when I throw up a line on the tree, so I can bring my wired antenna down and up. Really quickly finishing up, you can see here, very simple antenna setup. This is a random wire antenna, throws up in a tree. 35.5 feet is the one I use, which is the non-resident on any band. That's what makes it a random wire, is non-resident on any band. And use a 9-to-1 unun with that, and an RF choke, and a counterpose is recommended. By the way, little trivia, a end-fed half wave and a random wire antenna are just versions of an off-center fed dipole. Okay, just extreme versions. And don't forget to take your dogs along. You need your dogs. These are your end insulators. And if you got a mast, use it together. And here's an end-fed 67-foot, 40-meter end-fed configuration with 49-to-1 unun and a counterpoise. Just, again, whatever the terrain allows you to do, whatever kind of things you want to do. The nice thing about an end-fed antenna is that if the 4901 is correctly designed with the capacitors in it, it works really well at most bands with an ATU. This is one of my first versions of a linked dipole. Basically, I don't have a lot of tools. So I went to the hardware store, grabbed a bunch of PVC couplings, drilled a couple of holes in them. Now I have linked dipoles. And this is what I use for linked counterpoise. Oh, what? A linked counterpoise is just a not as good a version of a linked dipole. It's just that one's acting as a counterpole, the other one's acting as a dipole. It's the same, right? So very versatile. But since then, because I get fixated on things, I've gone to a different setup. This is what I use for linked dipoles now, is I use this kind of configuration with bent plugs. Why? Because sometimes you're pulling those inline couplings, inline crimps apart, and they just won't move, and then you start having to bend them and do things with them. So I went with this now. And when I tune it, I just cut the wire where it screws its screw in, so I can then trim the wire from there as I go through for a linked dipole. And this is a inverted V-link dipole. This is a standard setup with a feed point with a 1-to-1 balun on a mast. And here you can see the light stands being used to support it. Or an off-center fed dipole. Same thing with the link is an inverted V. Or you can set this up as a fan dipole. You can also do fan dipoles in that way as well. Or in a tree, whatever's convenient. Or go traditional if you want to go traditional. This is the crow's nest I told you about before. If I want to use this on a picnic table, all I have to do is remove one of the radial screws and it'll clamp it, and then I use a clamp to clamp it to the table. And then it'll support that as well. This is one of my newest, this is an old antenna that I've now been playing with. I used this at last field day. This is a Sigma 12, this is a Force 12 Sigma 5. Sigma 5. If you're familiar with the Force 12s these days, they're big, expensive Yagis. But the guy who built these originally built this kind of antenna first, and this is a vertical dipole with a capacitive hat. It works really well. It has basically a relay, relays inside, and I just energize the relays to what meter band I want, and it immediately changes the coil configuration for loading coils. Works really well. And I unfortunately have two of these by accident. So I'm trying to get rid of one of them. The only thing I'm going to do with them, this is my project for the year, is they really weren't built to be waterproof. So I'm rehousing it into be more waterproof. But it worked really fine. I used it at a field day. It worked really well. Power. Last thing I'll talk about is power. If you're going to do CODA, you got to have power. And you have to have a way of charging it. So the only way you can charge it is with an AC generator, which is really bulky, or solar panels, which take, and either way it's going to take a long time. So think about eating up a 30 amp hour battery to its cutoff point. It's not going to take an hour to charge. It's going to take almost 7 to 12 hours to charge, depending on how you're charging it. So that means I carry at least two 30, when I'm using a 100 watt radio, I'm carrying two 30 watt amp hour batteries, one to use and one to charge. And I have 200 watts of solar power, so I can charge that. And I will still, when I'm on the second battery, I'm operating QRP. I'm not operating at full power because I don't know how long it's going to charge that battery depending on the weather. And if I'm driving, which often I'm doing to the next location, I'm using the AC in the car to charge the batteries. Oh, okay, thank you for telling me. I'm about done. And I also have something like a Jackerbie that I also carry that I don't use to power my full power radios, mostly to power everything else in the car that I want to use. Like a CPAP. When I go camping, I carry my CPAP with me. This is the battery, one of my battery boxes. You can see it's got a 400 watt inverter for other things that I might want to do with it, like if I have to run my CPAP off of it. This is the other battery box. It has a USB port charger built with it and an LED light bar in it. And all of these have their own independent chargers that I have to plug in so I can as well. And this is this is the Go Kit for my GMRS radio that I have for my family and myself. So my kids have this same box that I built for them. I have a license for the family, and then we use the GMRS radio repeaters in emergencies so we can talk to each other. And they just have a Go Kit with an antenna, just like this. And there's a 90 watt inverter there if they need it for USB charging, additional USB charging or running something small. And that's it. Join the CODA ranks wherever it's always field day, and I'll see you down the road, and thank you for your patience, and I'm open to any comments, questions, shares, or whatever, trivial, pursuit, whatever you want. Yeah.
Have you had good luck with the capacitive hats on your antennas?
Yes, I have. They've done well for me. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. They're good for, I use them also, as you probably know, I use them to offset the impedance of the antenna to balance out the resonance as well as just to shorten the antennas. Because you can shorten the antennas a lot, we don't talk about a lot. With loading coils themselves, we all know shorten antennas because of phase changes. What people sometimes don't talk about a lot is you can do the same thing with a capacitor. So, I think there's a call for me, right?
No.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry if I did that.
No, I have the capacitive hat for my Tar Heels and have been underwhelmed by, it doesn't do anything for me as far as I can see.
Well, the question I have for you is, I think that's not a question, but things you might try, and you may have tried it, is see what it's like where you end up on the inductance tuning for the Tar Heel without the capacitive hat and with the capacitive hat, and see how that affects the spread of where you can operate with that coil. Because I suspect that, I don't know a lot about the Tar Heel, other than I know what it is, and I don't use it, is that capacitive hat was sized to allow them to adjust the size of that coil. The higher you go up the mast, the higher you go up the antenna with the coil, the bigger the coil has to be, the inductance goes up. And so the capacitive hat can help out with the radiation. What you're trying to do with the antenna capacitor also is increase the radiation resistance. But do the experiment, see what happens. Any other questions? Did I help or just destroy it?
No, I've got a short coil Tar Heel and a long coil Tar Heel, and I've just been underwhelmed by the capacitive hat I got for it.
Yeah, it could be. Also, remember when you're using the Tar Heel, any kind of antenna like that, the losses are really high.
Yeah.
You know, and that's on the line of an antenna is better than no antenna in a lot of respects. And I don't mean to sound flippant, but it's got a lot of losses.
Right.
Other questions or comments or experiences they want to share?
I heard a story, some of you guys have heard it, I thought it was kind of cute. Guy was doing Parks on the Air somewhere. I think it was on the Parks on the Air site, I read about it. He was all set up and going away to town, and he put an end fit up in a tree, and all of a sudden here comes a park ranger. He asked him what's going on, he told him like that, and he says, well, according to the lady that stops complaining, he says, you're sucking power out of the tree. This is a true story. Yeah, and he says, I know you're not, but he says, may I ask you, next time or any of your friends come here, you're more than welcome to come here, but just check in with me so I can tell the people that come up there that you're not stealing power out of the tree.
You know, what I usually get is people flippantly saying, are you contacting the aliens? I always say, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody online have any questions or comments or experiences they want to share?
In the places that you have camped, have you ever had one of the park rangers come up and just absolutely be a total butt and say, take it down?
No, because I usually check in with the park rangers and tell them what I'm doing. Bob, you remember Bob Watson, I think you introduced him. He's got your call sign, but the letters are different.
Yes.
K7RBW. He and I, for field day, often would used to go to a little pull-off area just before the trailhead at Mount Pilchuck. And we would check with the ranger station. Many times we'd go, if they say, wait, here, we're going to be up there. They said, yeah. And we'd camp up there on that side. And you're not supposed to really camp up there. And one time the park ranger came by, see what we were up to again, and he wasn't one who checked. He came by and he goes, I said, any problem? He says, oh, no. You guys we're fine with. You want to work here, work here. We have no problem with you guys. There are other people, we want them out of here, but you guys are fine. And that's from a guy who's looking at, 3 masts and 3 tents. So, in a small area. So usually if you check in with them, they're fine. What you really have to be careful of is what's the fire danger?
Yeah.
And what's the propensity for a thunderstorm? Because you have a lightning rod. They just increase the conductivity of the tree that you're hanging on.
Yeah.
So I would be very aware of that. And also we often don't do this in the field, but if you're in an area where you think, we don't have to worry about that so much in the Northwest, but in other parts of the country, you need to carry a lightning arrestor or two. And when it's lightning time, I disconnect everything when I'm in the field. It's not time for me to play that. Because, hey, what do I need another lightning rod for? Yeah, I mean, I haven't had any problem. I usually get, and I sometimes have operated at Seward Park in Seattle because it's near my house. And I've had people come up to me and go like, "That's the biggest antenna I've ever seen." And I would say, "Yeah, it is, probably. And by the way, I just talked to Argentina and just talked to Puerto Rico." And they go, "Wow," because, whenever someone's walking up to you in a campsite or anywhere and they talk about it's an opening to be an ambassador for ham radio.
Yep.
That is your opening. And if someone really has interest, okay, for me, and then I got this question. I don't know if I got interviewed, unfortunately, or fortunately got interviewed by a podcast. And, the question, what do you give people? I said, do you have brochures and things? I said, no, if they're that interested, I'll give them w7dao@arl.net. That's my, not my private email, but the other email. And then if they email me, I'll answer their questions. Because I'm always looking for, somebody to put in a class, somewhere. Other questions, comments before I call
I
it?
had a ranger at a state park, and I had a very modest setup, and the people 6 campsites down from me bitched and complained the whole time, and claimed that I was interfering with whatever electronic device they had. And I says, well, when he came over, I said, well, that's interesting. I haven't even turned it on yet.
Yeah.
And he goes, I had that feeling. And he said, what exactly are you doing? He says, well, I'm just practicing deploying my equipment, so if there was ever like an earthquake or a severe storm or something like that, I know that my gear is going to work. And he says, would you mind if I brought these complaining bastards over to your campsite? I said, no. So they came over, and of course they just jumped right into money. He goes, shut up. Now, mister, you tell him what you told me what you're doing here. And so I told him, and they kind of looked at me, and I said, do any of you remember the Alaska earthquake in '64 or whenever that was? Oh yeah, I was 10 years old. Do you realize the only people talking on radios for 24 hours after the earthquake were ham operators? That's what I'm practicing for. And then the park ranger says, yeah, go away. Leave him alone. I like that ranger.
I like that ranger too. And also, I primarily work HF, so it was all geared about HF. But, there's nothing that says you can't operate VHF, UHF,
Yeah.
right? You can do satellite, you can do what you call weak signal, which is SSB, and digital on VHF, UHF. There's anything that you can do with your radio locally in your house, at your base, can be done in the field. It's just time, money, and weight. Which sounds like the rest of the hobby. Sort of like, everybody has their thing. Boat is something you throw money into, house, whatever the hobby is. The nice thing is I actually got this year to a point. Don't quote me on this. I'm going to say this. I got to a point this year. I was just thinking about this today. I don't need anything. I don't have any desire for another radio. I don't have a desire for another antenna system. I've got everything I need. I don't think I need anything else. Now, ask me what am I going to be doing at the swap
We'll
meet.
talk next year.
We'll talk next year. Okay, last question. By the way, I appreciate you guys letting me have the moment to talk with you guys and share this information with you. So feel free to email me if you have any other questions. I'm happy to help. And as always, I will be teaching a class. I will make an announcement about teaching a tech class in late February, probably, early March. So I will be sending it out on the wire for people who want to come down. Also, I always have the following offer. If you can guarantee 10 people in the room, I will make it so I'll teach a class. So if you ever need that. Anyway, thank you very much. Unless anyone have any last questions or things they'd like to share.
Just great stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
Really
My pleasure.